She found the
Exhibit A,
second
Your
phone at
Honor.
9 p.m.
The complete
By
financial
9:15, her
records.
water broke on his office floor.
changes everything.
Claire Montgomery Weston thought she had the perfect life. A billionaire husband, a Manhattan penthouse, a baby girl on the way. But while she waited alone at their anniversary dinner, her husband was in a hotel suite with his mistress, laughing about how clueless his pregnant wife was. What Marcus Weston didn't know,
Be careful with this, it has everything.
his wife used to be a corporate
Thank you,
attorney,
Rosa.
and she was about to use every single
won't let you
skill she
down.
had buried to destroy him. But here's where it gets
I lived
interesting.
with this secret for years.
Just when Claire thought she
afraid
had
to
won,
speak.
she discovered something
But I
terrifying.
cannot let his lies
The affair
continue.
wasn't the real betrayal. Her husband wasn't the real enemy. And the woman she trusted least would become her most powerful ally. This is a story about a wife who lost everything and came back with a vengeance no one saw coming. Stay with me until the end. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. The courtroom smelled like old wood and expensive cologne. Claire Montgomery Weston stood alone at the plaintiff's table, 9 months pregnant, facing a wall of 6 lawyers in $1,000 suits. Her husband Marcus sat behind them, his face arranged in that practiced expression of wounded innocence she had once found charming. Judge Patricia Hawkins looked down from the bench, her reading glasses perched on her nose. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "Mrs. Weston," the judge said, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. "Given the evidence presented by the respondent's counsel, this court has serious concerns about your fitness to—" Claire raised her hand. Her voice came out steady, surprising even herself. "Your Honor, before you rule, I would like to submit one final piece of evidence." She reached into her bag and pulled out a single USB drive. Such a small thing to hold so much destruction. This is going to change everything. Marcus's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named William Crawford, shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. We have received no discovery on whatever Mrs. Weston claims to possess." Judge Hawkins held up her hand for silence. Her eyes never left Claire's face. "I'll allow it. Mrs. Weston, you may proceed." Claire plugged the drive into the courtroom's evidence system. The screen behind the judge flickered to life. "3 weeks ago," Claire began, "I thought I was going to lose everything. My home, my reputation, my law license, my daughter before she was even born." She paused, letting the words settle over the room like dust. "I was wrong. I just hadn't figured out yet who the real enemy was." The first document appeared on screen, a financial record from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Behind the wall of lawyers, Marcus Weston's face went white. But that was 3 weeks from now. Let me tell you how we got here. 3 weeks earlier, Claire Montgomery Weston woke up believing she had the perfect life. The Manhattan penthouse caught the morning light in a way that made everything look like a magazine spread. She padded barefoot across the marble floors, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other holding her phone. The nursery was almost finished. Soft lavender walls, a white crib with organic cotton sheets, a mobile of silver stars that would catch the light and send tiny rainbows across the ceiling. In 6 weeks, her daughter would sleep here. Eleanor, she had decided. Eleanor Margaret Montgomery Weston. She texted Marcus with a smile on her face. "Cannot wait for dinner tonight. 2 years since you proposed. I love you." The message showed delivered, then read. No response came, but Claire didn't worry. Marcus was always busy. That was what happened when you were a tech billionaire. She had understood that when she married him. Her phone rang. Her mother's face appeared on the screen, and Claire answered the video call. "Morning, sweetheart," Margaret Montgomery said. At 62, she still had the kind of elegant bearing that came from old Virginia money and older Virginia stubbornness. "How's my granddaughter?" "Active," Claire laughed, rubbing her belly. "She's been doing gymnastics since 4 a.m. Takes after you. You never could sit still either." Claire walked through the penthouse, showing her mother the nursery updates, the new rocking chair that had been delivered, the stack of children's books she had already started collecting. "Where's Marcus?" her mother asked. The question was casual, but Claire caught something underneath it. "Working. You know how it is." "I know he missed your last 2 doctor's appointments." "Mom, I'm not criticizing, sweetheart. I'm observing." Her mother paused. "You know what your grandmother always said? Keep your own bank account, your own friends, and your own secrets." Claire laughed. I don't have any secrets from Marcus. That's what worries me. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Baby names and nursery colors, and whether organic diapers were worth the extra cost. Normal mother-daughter things. After she hung up, Claire spent the afternoon getting ready for dinner. Their anniversary dinner. 2 years since Marcus had proposed on a beach in Maui, the sunset turning the sky pink and gold behind him. 2 years since she had said yes without hesitation. She chose a navy blue dress that accommodated her belly while still making her feel beautiful. Pearl earrings her father had given her mother on their wedding day. A light touch of makeup. By 7:30, she was waiting in their apartment lobby for the car service. The reservation was for 8 p.m. at 11 Madison Park. Marcus had made it himself months ago. He had been so excited about it at the time. At 8:15, Claire sat alone at their table. The waiter had brought her sparkling water and a sympathetic expression. At 8:30, Marcus's phone went to voicemail for the third time. At 8:45, she called his assistant. Bradley, she said, keeping her voice calm, I'm looking for Marcus. He was supposed to meet me for dinner. Bradley Thompson's voice crackled through the phone, nervous and uncertain. He left the office around 6, said he had a personal appointment. Something cold moved through Claire's chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. A personal appointment, she repeated. That's what he said, Mrs. Weston. I'm sorry, I don't know anything else. She hung up. The restaurant hummed with conversation around her, couples and business dinners and celebrations she wasn't part of. The waiter approached again, asking if she wanted to order. Just the check, Claire said. I don't think he's coming. She didn't go home. She didn't know why exactly. Some instinct, some whisper in the back of her mind that she couldn't ignore. Instead, she told the driver to take her to Weston Dynamics headquarters. The building was mostly dark at this hour, but Claire still had her key card from her days as Marcus's in-house counsel. She had given up practicing law when the company went public. When Marcus convinced her that they didn't need two incomes, and wouldn't it be nice to focus on starting a family? She had agreed because she loved him, because she trusted him. The elevator took her to the executive floor. Marcus's corner office was dark, but she went in anyway. She didn't turn on the lights. The city glow through the windows was enough. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she found it. The desk drawer was locked, but she knew where he kept the spare key, behind the frame of their wedding photo on his bookshelf. Her fingers shook as she opened the drawer. Inside was a second phone, a phone she had never seen before. A phone with a different case, a different number, a different life. She turned it on. There was no password. The messages were right there, months of them. Texts with heart emojis from someone saved simply as Jay. I miss you already, baby. Last night was incredible. When are you going to tell her? Soon, I promise, after the baby is born. Then we can be together for real. And then, from this morning, the message that shattered everything. Cannot wait for tonight, baby. She thinks we are having anniversary dinner. Followed by a laughing emoji. Claire scrolled through the photos. She didn't want to look, but she couldn't stop. Pictures of Marcus with a younger woman. Brunette, beautiful. The kind of beautiful that comes with a personal trainer and a professional photographer. Intimate pictures. Vacation pictures from a trip Marcus had told her was a business conference in Miami. 6 months of lies. 6 months of a double life. 6 months of looking her in the eye every single day and choosing to betray her. The phone slipped from Claire's fingers. She heard herself make a sound that wasn't quite a bawl and wasn't quite a scream. And then the pain hit. Not emotional pain, physical pain. A cramping, tearing sensation low in her belly that doubled her over and sent fluid rushing down her legs. Her water had broken. 7 weeks early, alone in her husband's dark office, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, Claire Montgomery Weston went into premature labor. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical jargon and pain that came in waves. Claire gripped the second phone in her hand the entire time, unable to let it go. The EMT tried to take it from her, to check her vital signs more easily, but she held on like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Maybe it was. Mount Sinai's labor and delivery unit was bright and cold and smelled like antiseptic. Nurses in purple scrubs surrounded her, asking questions she could barely process. How far along are you? 33 weeks. Is this your first pregnancy? Yes. Is there someone we should call? Claire almost laughed. The person she would normally call was the reason she was here. My mother, she managed, Margaret Montgomery, and my friend Diane Callahan. They gave her something for the pain, something to slow the contractions. A doctor appeared and disappeared, talking about bed rest and tocolytics and fetal monitoring. Through it all, Claire held the phone. She finally called Marcus at 11 p.m., 3 hours after she had been admitted. He answered on the fourth ring. His voice was drowsy, relaxed, the voice of a man who had just woken up from a very satisfying sleep. Claire, babe, what's up? I got caught up with... I'm in labor, she said flatly. I'm at Mount Sinai. Silence, then the sound of rustling sheets. And then, faint but unmistakable, a woman's voice in the background. Babe, come back to bed. Claire closed her eyes. I'll be there soon, Marcus said quickly. Just hold on, I'll be right there. He hung up before she could respond. Not that she had anything left to say. The nurses had dimmed the lights. Machines beeped in gentle rhythms. Claire lay in the hospital bed, her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter kick against her palm. I'm sorry, baby girl, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have known, but I didn't. Marcus arrived at 2 in the morning, 3 hours. He had taken 3 hours to get to the hospital where his wife and unborn child were in crisis. He came through the door in jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, his hair still damp from a shower. A shower to wash away the evidence, Claire realized. He had stopped to shower before coming to see if his daughter would survive. And he smelled like perfume, something floral and expensive. Nothing like the vanilla and lavender Claire always wore. Hey, he said softly, moving toward the bed. How are you feeling? The doctor said they stopped the contractions. The baby's going to be fine. He tried to kiss her forehead. She turned away. Who is she? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion, then recognition, then something hard and defensive. Claire, you've had a traumatic night. You're stressed. The doctor said stress can... Who is she, Marcus? He straightened up. His voice went cold. You're being hormonal. Let's talk about this when you're feeling better. He pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down, pulling out his regular phone and scrolling through emails like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just asked him the most important question of their marriage. Claire stared at the ceiling. The machines beeped. Her daughter kicked. Something shifted inside her then, not physically, emotionally. The part of her that had trusted, that had believed, that had loved blindly, it calcified into something harder, something colder, something useful. Marcus fell asleep in the chair around 3 a.m. Claire lay awake, watching him, planning. At 6 in the morning, a nurse named Brenda Johnson came to check her vitals. Brenda was a warm woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. She had been on duty all night, had seen Marcus arrive 3 hours late, had watched the way he dismissed his wife's questions. After she finished taking Claire's blood pressure, Brenda lingered by the bed. Honey, she said quietly, I've seen that look before. Whatever he did, you don't have to decide anything tonight. You take care of you and that baby first. The rest can wait until you're strong. Claire met her eyes. How do you know something happened? Brenda glanced at the door, making sure Marcus was still asleep in the waiting room where he had eventually moved. Because I've been doing this job for 27 years, and I've learned to recognize when a woman figures out she married the wrong man. She patted Claire's hand gently. Get some rest. Build your strength. Whatever comes next, you're going to need it. Claire was released 2 days later with strict instructions for bed rest. The baby was stable. The contractions had stopped. But she needed to stay calm, stay rested, stay stress-free for the next few weeks. Stay stress-free. That was almost funny. Marcus drove her home in silence. He tried to hold her hand at one point. She moved it away. We should talk, he said. Yes, Claire agreed. We should, but not yet. She needed time. Time to plan, time to prepare, time to make sure that when she struck, she didn't miss. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of Claire pretending everything was fine, smiling at Marcus over breakfast, accepting his kisses on her cheek, listening to his lies about late nights at the office. 2 weeks of gathering evidence. She had saved everything from the second phone before returning it to his desk. Screenshots of every text, every photo, every damning message. She had tracked the credit card statements he thought she didn't have access to. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry that had never been given to her. And she had called her best friend. Diane Callahan had been Claire's closest friend since law school. They had studied for the bar together, celebrated their passes together, been bridesmaids at each other's weddings. Diane's wedding had ended in divorce 3 years ago when she discovered her husband had a second family in Connecticut. Now Diane was one of the most successful divorce attorneys in New York. They called her the closer. "That son of a bitch," Diane said when Claire showed her the evidence. They were in Diane's office, surrounded by law books and certificates of accomplishment. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." "I already did it," Claire said. She pulled out a folder. Inside was everything she had gathered: bank statements, credit card records, a preliminary asset assessment she had put together using skills she thought she had left behind when she gave up her legal career. "I hired a forensic accountant 3 days ago," Claire continued. "He's already found 2 offshore accounts Marcus never told me about. I hired a private investigator who's been following him. I have photos, timestamps, hotel receipts, and I documented everything using the legal training you helped me develop." Diane stared at her, genuinely impressed. "Girl, I taught you well." "I want to destroy him," Claire said. Her voice was calm, but underneath it was steel. "But more importantly, I want to protect my daughter. I want full custody, the house, and enough money that he can never control us." Diane smiled. It was not a nice smile. "So you want everything except the man?" "I want him to have exactly what he deserves, nothing. This is why we were friends." Diane stood and walked to a small bar cart in the corner of her office. "I'll pour the wine, sparkling cider for you." They clinked glasses. "To the end of Marcus Weston," Diane said. "To new beginnings," Claire replied. The plan was set. Now she just had to execute it. The morning of the ambush, Claire woke before dawn. Marcus had come home at 3 a.m., claiming a crisis with the Shanghai office. She had smiled and pretended to believe him. She could smell the other woman's perfume on his collar, but she said nothing. Not yet. She lay in bed, watching the darkness slowly give way to gray, then pink, then gold. Manhattan waking up outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city that never sleeps, finally catching its breath. At 4:30, she got up. She showered. She dressed in simple black pants and a cream-colored blouse. No jewelry except her wedding ring. She wanted to look serious, professional, in control. At 4:45, she went to the living room and turned on a single lamp. She sat in the leather armchair facing the door and waited. The second phone was on the coffee table in front of her. She had retrieved it from his office the day before. At 5:02 a.m., she heard the elevator, then the click of keys in the lock. Then the door swung open and Marcus walked in, still wearing his suit from yesterday, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. He froze when he saw her. "Claire, what are you doing up?" "The doctor said you need rest." She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't react at all. "Sit down, Marcus." Something in her voice made him obey. He sat on the sofa across from her, his eyes darting to the phone on the table. Recognition dawned on his face. "I can explain," he started. "No." Claire's voice was flat. "You cannot. I have read every message on that phone. I have seen every photo. I know about Jessica Crane, the influencer you have been sleeping with for 6 months. I know about the hotel rooms you charged to a corporate card you thought I didn't know about. I know about the jewelry you bought her with money that belonged to our marriage." Marcus's face cycled through expressions: shock, anger, and then, settling into his features like a mask, calculation. "Okay," he said slowly. "So you know, fine. We can work through this. People make mistakes. I'll end it with Jessica. We can go to counseling, think about the baby." "I am thinking about the baby." Claire reached beside her chair and lifted a manila folder. "That is why I had these prepared." She placed the folder on the coffee table next to the phone. Marcus picked it up and opened it. His face went white. "Divorce papers," Claire said. "And a settlement agreement. You will sign both tonight." Marcus laughed. It was a harsh, disbelieving sound. "You're out of your mind. You think you can just ambush me in my own home and force me to sign away?" "Yes," Claire interrupted. "I do. Because if you don't sign, I will take everything I know to your board of directors, to your investors, to every media outlet that will listen." She leaned forward slightly. "I have screenshots of you texting your mistress that you were going to, and I quote, dump the pregnant cow after the IPO. I wonder how that will play with your female customer base. 63% of Weston Dynamics customers are women, Marcus. What do you think happens to your stock price when they find out how you really feel about pregnant women?" Marcus stared at her. For the first time since she had known him, he looked genuinely afraid. "You wouldn't. Try me." Silence stretched between them. The city continued to wake up outside the windows, oblivious to the war being waged in this room. Marcus tried a different approach. His voice softened, became the charming, persuasive tone he used in board meetings and investor presentations. "Claire, baby, let's just slow down. You're upset. You have every right to be, but let's not make impermanent decisions when you're this emotional. The pregnancy hormones are not making me divorce you, Marcus. Your girlfriend is." He flinched. Claire stood and walked to the window. The sun was fully up now, painting the city in shades of gold. "You have two choices," she said, her back to him. "Sign these papers quietly, give me what I'm asking for, and we handle this like adults. Or I burn your reputation to the ground and take everything anyway in a very public, very ugly court battle." She turned to face him. "You have until I count to 60 to decide." She began counting, slowly, steadily. At 30, Marcus picked up the papers again. His hands were shaking. At 45, he found a pen. At 52, he signed. When Claire reached 60, she walked over and picked up the documents. His signature was scrawled at the bottom. Marcus Weston, the tech billionaire who thought he was the smartest person in every room, had just surrendered everything. "My lawyer will be in touch," Claire said. "I suggest you find somewhere else to stay for a while." She turned and walked toward the bedroom to pack a bag. Behind her, she heard Marcus's voice, smaller than she had ever heard it. "I loved you, you know, in the beginning. I really did." Claire paused at the doorway. "I know," she said without turning around. "That's what makes this so sad." Swear. 24 hours later, Claire woke up in Diane's guest room feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Free. The morning sun streamed through gauze curtains. She could hear Diane moving around in the kitchen, the smell of coffee drifting through the apartment. Claire reached for her phone and called her mother. "It's done, Mom. He signed everything." Margaret Montgomery was silent for a long moment. "Oh, sweetheart, are you okay?" "I think so. For the first time in a long time, I think I'm going to be okay." "I'm proud of you. Your grandmother would be proud too." After the call, Claire joined Diane in the kitchen. Her friend had set out a full breakfast spread, eggs and bacon and fresh fruit, and in front of Claire's place at the table, a bottle of sparkling cider in an ice bucket. "We're celebrating," Diane announced, "to the most satisfying divorce I've ever handled. We haven't even filed yet. Honey, making a billionaire cry at 5 a.m., that's already a win." They ate and laughed, and for a few hours, everything felt possible. Claire found herself scrolling through real estate listings, looking at brownstones in Brooklyn, a new home for a new life, a place where Eleanor could grow up surrounded by love instead of lies. She found one that was perfect. 4 bedrooms, a small backyard, a kitchen with enough room for a table where she and her daughter could do homework and art projects and have the kind of conversations Claire had always had with her own mother. She sent the listing to Diane. "I want to make an offer," Claire said, "as soon as the settlement is finalized." Diane looked at the photos and smiled. "It's perfect. You're going to be happy there." For 24 hours, Claire believed her. Then Diane's phone rang. Claire watched her friend's face change, saw the blood drain from her cheeks, saw her mouth tighten into a thin, hard line. "I understand," Diane said into the phone. Yes, I'll tell her. Hell." She hung up and looked at Claire with devastation in her eyes. "What?" Claire asked. "What happened?" "Marcus is claiming he was coerced. He says you threatened him while he was intoxicated. His lawyers filed a motion to void the agreement." "That's ridiculous. He was completely sober." "There's more." Diane took a breath. "Your key card access at his office that night? They're calling it corporate Espionage. He's filed a restraining order. You can't go near him, the apartment, or the company. Claire felt the room spin. He can't do this. His father is a retired judge, Claire. Richard Weston. He has connections everywhere. Diane paused. They're trying to get your law license revoked. The words hit Claire like physical blows, each one another crack in the foundation she had thought was solid. But I have evidence. I have the text, the photos, evidence you obtained by entering his private office without authorization. Evidence from a phone you took without permission. Diane shook her head. They're going to argue it's all inadmissible. And even if it isn't, they're going to drag out this fight for years. You'll be bankrupt before you ever see a courtroom. Claire's phone buzzed, an email notification. She opened it with numb fingers. It was from her bank, a notification that her access to all joint accounts had been frozen pending a court review. She checked her personal checking account, the one she had kept from before the marriage, the one her mother had always told her to maintain. $847. That was all she had left. $847 in a suitcase full of maternity clothes and a baby who was due in 5 weeks. I need to go back to the apartment, Claire said. I need to get my things, my documents. You can't. The restraining order? He can't keep me out of my own home. Legally, right now he can. Claire, I'm so sorry. I'm going to fight this, but it's going to take time. Time. Claire didn't have time. Her daughter didn't have time. She walked to the window and looked out at the city that suddenly felt like enemy territory. 24 hours ago, she had been triumphant. Now she had nothing. The first catastrophe came the next morning. Claire tried to check into a hotel near Diane's apartment, somewhere quiet where she could rest, where she could think, where she could plan her next move. Her credit card was declined. I'm sorry, ma'am, the desk clerk said, her voice professionally apologetic. Would you like to try another card? Claire tried all of them. Every card she had was linked to accounts Marcus controlled. Every single one came back declined. She walked out of the hall lobby into the bright Manhattan morning, 8 months pregnant with nowhere to go and no money to get there. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She answered anyway. Mrs. Weston? This is James Morrison from the New York State Bar Association. We've received a complaint regarding your professional conduct. I'm calling to inform you that your law license has been placed under administrative review pending investigation. Claire leaned against the building wall, trying to keep her breathing steady. On what grounds? Corporate espionage, theft of proprietary information, coercion. The man's voice was neutral, procedural. You have the right to respond in writing and within 30 days. Do you have any questions? She had 1,000 questions. She couldn't voice any of them. After she hung up, she called her mother. Come home to Virginia, Margaret said immediately. I'll send money for a train ticket. Just come home, sweetheart. Mom, I can't run. If I leave the state, his lawyers will use it against me. They'll say I abandoned the jurisdiction. It'll hurt my custody case. Then you stay with Diane. Stay as long as you need. We'll figure this out. Her mother paused. And Claire, this is why I always told you to have your own money. Learn from this. When this is over, you make sure your daughter never depends on anyone for her survival. The second catastrophe came 4 hours later. Diane called, her voice tight with barely contained fury. Page 6 is running a story. Someone leaked. Claire found the article on her phone. The headline made her physically sick. Tech billionaire's wife accused of blackmail. Pregnant Claire Weston allegedly threatened husband with false affair claims. The article painted her as unstable, gold-digging, manipulative. There were quotes from sources close to Marcus, describing her as mentally unstable and obsessed with money. Worst of all, someone had leaked her hospital photo, the one from the night she went into premature labor. She looked pale and frightened and vulnerable, and now millions of strangers were using it to call her a liar. Claire made the mistake of reading the comments. She probably made the whole thing up. These gold diggers are all the same. Poor Marcus, trapped by a psycho. I hope he gets full custody. That baby doesn't deserve a mother like her. She barely made it to Diane's bathroom before she threw up. When she emerged, shaking and pale, Diane was waiting with a glass of water. Don't read the comments, Diane said. Never read the comments. Too late. The internet is a cesspool of people who peaked in high school. Focus on what matters. This is a PR hit, but it's not fatal. But it felt fatal. It felt like her entire life had been fed through a shredder while the world watched and laughed. The third catastrophe came 3 days later. Claire was served papers at Diane's apartment. A process server knocked on the door at 8 a.m. and handed her a thick envelope with her name on it. Inside was an emergency motion filed by Marcus's attorneys. They were claiming she was mentally unfit to parent. The motion cited her erratic behavior in breaking into Marcus's office, her unstable financial situation, her history of manipulation and coercion. They were asking for full custody of the baby. Her daughter, the child she had carried for 8 months, the child she had felt kick and hiccup and dance, the child she had already named and loved and promised to protect. They wanted to take her before she was even born. Claire read the motion 3 times. Then she walked very calmly to Diane's bathroom, closed the door, sat down on the cold tile floor, and broke. The sobs came from somewhere so deep she didn't recognize the sound of her own voice. She cried until her throat was raw, until her eyes were swollen shut, until there was nothing left but emptiness. She had lost everything: her home, her money, her reputation, her law license, and now maybe her daughter. A knock came at the bathroom door. "Claire, sweetheart, it's Mom, let me in." Margaret Montgomery must have gotten on the first train from Virginia when Diane called. Claire didn't have the strength to stand, but she reached up and unlocked the door. Her mother came in and sat down on the cold tile floor next to her, said nothing, just held her daughter while she cried. After what felt like hours, Margaret finally spoke. "I remember when your father died. I thought I would never breathe again. I had 2 daughters, a house with a mortgage, and $200 in the bank. His business partners tried to take everything from me. Said he owed them money. Said the business was theirs now." Claire looked up at her mother, tears still streaming. "What did you do?" "I got up the next morning, and the morning after that, and I found every single piece of paper your father ever signed. Because men like that, they always leave a trail. They think they're smarter than everyone." Margaret smiled grimly. "They're not." She cupped Claire's face in her hands. "Montgomery women don't break, Claire. We bend until we're ready to snap back." Claire took a shaky breath. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom." "Yes, you can, because you don't have a choice. That baby girl is counting on you, and you are not going to let her down." Somewhere deep inside Claire, underneath the despair and the exhaustion and the grief, something stirred. Something that remembered who she used to be before she gave up her career, before she made herself small to fit into Marcus's shadow. She was Claire Montgomery. Her grandmother had survived the Depression. Her mother had rebuilt her life from nothing. And she would be damned if she let Marcus Weston take her daughter. She wiped her eyes and looked at her mother. "Help me up." A week passed, then 2. Claire stayed at Diane's apartment, sleeping in the guest room, spending her days researching and planning. Her mother sent money from the emergency fund her grandmother had established decades ago. $50,000 in cash, delivered by wire transfer. "Montgomery women always have an escape plan," her mother said when Claire tried to thank her. "Now use it." Diane filed motions to buy time, objections to the emergency custody petition, demands for discovery, legal maneuvers designed to slow down Marcus's blitzkrieg attack. But they were losing, slowly, steadily losing. Marcus had unlimited resources and a father who knew every judge in the New York court system. Claire had determination and a dwindling bank account. Sometimes at night, she let herself feel how scared she was, let herself acknowledge that she might actually lose, that her daughter might be taken from her before she ever got to hold her. But only at night. During the day, she worked. And then, 3 weeks after the catastrophes began, Claire received a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Claire, I need to see you. I have something. Meet me in Central Park by the Bethesda fountain. Come alone." The message was signed with a single initial. R. Claire stared at the text for a long time. It could be a trap. Marcus could be trying to manufacture another incident to use against her. But something told her it wasn't. Something told her this was important. She went. The October afternoon was cool and golden, the kind of perfect fall day that made Manhattan feel like a movie set. Claire sat on a bench near the fountain, watching joggers and tourists and nannies pushing strollers. She wondered if she would ever push her daughter in a stroller through this park. "Mrs. Claire," the voice came from behind her. Claire turned. Rosa Martinez stood there, wearing a plain coat and carrying a worn leather purse. The Weston family's housekeeper for 22 years. Claire had always liked Rosa. She was kind and warm and noticed things that others missed. "Rosa, what are you doing here?" Rosa sat down on the bench, keeping a careful distance between them. "I have something for you, something important." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive. "Mr. Marcus's father, Judge Weston, he made problems go away before. Other women, payments. I saw documents. I kept copies." Rosa's voice was quiet but steady. "For insurance." Claire stared at the drive. "What kind of documents?" "Everything. Money he moved to hide from the government, women he paid to stay quiet, judges he called to fix cases." Rosa met Claire's eyes. "He fired me last week, after 22 years, said I knew too much." "He was right." Rosa nodded. "He was right." Claire took the drive. It was lighter than she expected for something that could change everything. "Rosa, why are you helping me?" The older woman was quiet for a moment. "Because 22 years ago, I was young and stupid. A powerful man hurt me. No one helped. I watched him hurt others. I stayed quiet because I needed the job." She shook her head slowly. "Not anymore." "Help the next woman, Mrs. Claire. That's all I ask." Claire felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you, Rosa. I don't know how to repay you." "When?" Rosa stood up, pulling her coat tighter. "That's how you repay me." She walked away, disappearing into the afternoon crowds, leaving Claire alone with a USB drive that felt like a loaded weapon. That night, Claire and Diane went through the files. What they found was staggering. 3 previous non-disclosure agreements from women Marcus had harassed at Weston Dynamics. All of them had been paid 6-figure settlements to stay quiet. All of them had signed agreements drafted by Richard Weston's personal attorneys. Payoffs totaling over $2 million. Emails between Richard Weston and sitting judges, discussing cases, discussing favors, discussing the kind of arrangements that sent people to prison. And most importantly, financial records showing that Marcus had been hiding assets in offshore accounts. $47 million that had never been disclosed in any financial statement Claire had seen. $47 million that, legally, she was entitled to half of. "Holy Mother of God," Diane breathed, scrolling through the documents. "He's got $47 million in the Caymans he didn't disclose?" "Looks like it. Men really do think we're stupid, don't they? That's their biggest weakness." Diane sat back, her mind clearly racing through the legal implications. "This changes everything. If we can authenticate these documents, we can blow up their entire case. The custody motion, the restraining order, the bar complaint, all of it goes away when we show that Marcus and his father have been systematically hiding assets and obstructing justice." Claire felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. "What do we need to do?" "We need to verify everything. Get our forensic accountants to trace the money trail. Find the women who signed those NDAs and see if any of them will talk." Diane smiled, and this time it was a predator's smile. "And then we need to plan our attack very, very carefully." The settlement offer came 2 weeks later. Claire was in Diane's office reviewing documents with their forensic accounting team when Diane's assistant interrupted. "Marcus Weston's attorneys are on line 1. They're asking to discuss a settlement." Claire and Diane exchanged looks. "Put them through," Diane said. The call was brief. Marcus wanted to settle. His lawyers proposed $15 million, the Brooklyn brownstone Claire had wanted, and joint custody. "It's not everything," Diane said after she hung up, "but it's good. You'd be free. You could move on with your life." Claire stared at the wall, thinking, why now? Why is he settling now? Maybe he's scared. Maybe his lawyers finally told him how bad those texts look. Maybe... No. Claire shook her head. Marcus doesn't get scared, and he definitely doesn't back down when he thinks he's winning. She looked at Diane. Something changed, something we don't know about. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She went through Rosa's files again, searching for something she might have missed. At 3 a.m., she found it. Buried in the financial records was a reference to a pending government contract. Weston Dynamics was bidding on a massive Defense Department deal, artificial intelligence systems for military applications. The contract was worth $3 billion, and it required a morality clause review of company leadership. Claire dug deeper, found emails between Marcus and his father discussing the timeline. The final review was scheduled for next month. If any scandal emerged before then, an ugly divorce, proof of affairs, evidence of harassment, the contract would go to a competitor. Marcus wasn't settling because he was scared of losing the divorce. He was settling because he was scared of losing the contract. Claire sat back, her mind racing. If she accepted the settlement now, Marcus would get his $3 billion. He would emerge from this divorce wealthier than ever, his reputation intact, his company secure. But if she waited, if she held off until after the contract review, she kept digging through the files, and that's when she found something that changed everything. Judge Richard Weston, Marcus's father, wasn't just protecting his son. He was an investor in Weston Dynamics. Through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts, Richard Weston had poured millions into his son's company. When the government contract came through, he stood to make over $200 million. Every legal attack against Claire, the restraining order, the custody threats, the bar complaint, the articles in page 6, none of it was about Marcus protecting himself from a divorce. It was about Richard protecting his investment. Claire's hands were shaking as she scrolled through more documents. And then she found a name she recognized. Victoria Weston, Marcus's mother. 35 years ago, Victoria had been Richard Weston's legal assistant. There was a personnel file. And attached to that file was a non-disclosure agreement. Richard Weston had harassed his own future wife, paid her off, then married her. Victoria had been living in her own prison for 35 years. Claire sat in the dark, surrounded by files that painted a picture of a family built on secrets and abuse. Generation after generation of powerful men hurting women and paying for their silence. She thought about Victoria, the way Marcus's mother had always been cold to her, the way Victoria's eyes sometimes went distant during family dinners, like she was somewhere else entirely. She thought about what Rosa had said, help the next woman. Claire picked up her phone and sent a text to Diane. Don't accept the settlement. I have a new plan. Getting a meeting with Victoria Weston was not easy. The woman lived in a fortress of social obligations and security protocols. She had staff who screened her calls, assistants who managed her calendar, a husband who monitored her every move. But Claire knew something that Richard and Marcus had forgotten. Victoria was still on the board of the Montgomery Women's Charitable Foundation. Claire's grandmother had founded it 60 years ago. Victoria had been a member for 2 decades, long before Claire had married into the family. The foundation was having a luncheon at the Pierre Hotel. Victoria would be there, and so would Claire. She borrowed a dress from Diane and spent an hour on her makeup, trying to cover the exhaustion and stress of the past month. At 8.5 months pregnant, she couldn't do much about the dark circles under her eyes, or the way her face had thinned from skipped meals. But she could still look like a Montgomery. The luncheon was elegant and boring, exactly the kind of society event Claire had learned to navigate when she was a teenager. She made small talk with women whose names she barely remembered, smiled at old friends of her grandmother who expressed sympathy about her situation with carefully rehearsed words, and she waited. Victoria arrived at 12:30, wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She moved through the room like a ghost, greeting people she'd known for decades with the mechanical precision of someone who had stopped caring a long time ago. Claire intercepted her by the hors d'oeuvres table. Victoria, I need to speak with you. Marcus's mother froze. Her social mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw underneath. Fear? Hope? Claire couldn't tell. I don't think that would be appropriate, Victoria said carefully, given the circumstances. Please, 5 minutes. It's important. Victoria glanced around the room, checking to see if anyone was watching. Then she nodded, almost imperceptibly. The powder room, 5 minutes. They met in the ornate bathroom off the main ballroom. Claire locked the door behind them. If Richard finds out I talked to you, Victoria began. He won't. Claire pulled out her phone and showed Victoria a photograph. The NDA from 35 years ago, Victoria's signature at the bottom. Unless I decide to tell him. Victoria's face went white. Where did you get that? It doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is what I'm going to do with it. Silence stretched between them. Victoria's hands were trembling. You came here to blackmail me. No. Claire put the phone away. I came here to free you. Victoria stared at her. I know what Richard did to you, Claire said softly. I know he hurt you and then paid you off and then married you anyway. I know you've been living with that secret for 35 years, watching him do the same thing to other women, watching your son become the same kind of man. Tears were forming in Victoria's eyes. She blinked them away furiously. I didn't have a choice. I was 23. I was pregnant. I had nowhere else to go. I know. Claire took a step closer. But you have somewhere to go now. Victoria laughed bitterly. And where is that? With me, against them. The older woman shook her head. You don't understand. Richard will destroy me. He'll take everything. He'll make sure I never see my grandchildren. Victoria. Claire waited until Marcus's mother met her eyes. He's already destroyed you. You've just been too busy surviving to notice. Victoria was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. What do you want from me? I want you to testify about what Richard did to you, about what Marcus learned from his father, about the payoffs and the NDAs and the judges on the payroll. Claire paused. I want you to help me burn it all down. And if I do, then when it's over, you'll be free. For the first time in 35 years, you'll be free. Victoria stared at her. Claire could see the war happening behind her eyes. Decades of fear and survival instinct, fighting against something that had been buried for so long, she probably didn't even remember what it felt like. Hope. My son, Victoria said finally. Marcus, he'll go to prison. Probably not. White-collar crime. He'll get a fine and maybe a few months in a minimum security facility. Claire's voice was flat. But he'll lose the company, he'll lose the contract, and he'll have to watch his father face real consequences for the first time in his life. Victoria was quiet for a long time. I was a good mother, she said finally. In the beginning, I tried to teach him to be decent, to be kind. Her voice broke. But Richard, he undid everything. He made Marcus in his own image, and I let it happen because I was too scared to stop it. She looked at Claire with wet eyes. I failed my son. I let him become a monster. You can still stop the next generation. Claire touched her belly. Help me protect my daughter. Help me make sure she never grows up in a house like yours. Victoria took a shaky breath, then another. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll do it. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Claire and Diane worked 18-hour days building their case. Victoria met with them in secret, providing testimony and documentation and decades of accumulated knowledge about her husband's activities. The forensic accountants traced the money through shell companies in the Caymans, in Switzerland, and Luxembourg. They found the hidden millions. They found the bribes. They found the paper trail that Richard Weston thought he had buried forever. Claire's old law school contacts came through with pro bono support, investigators who specialized in corporate fraud, experts in financial crime, women who had left their own abusive marriages and wanted to help someone else escape. And slowly, piece by piece, they built a weapon. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Judge Patricia Hawkins had been assigned to the case, replacing the original judge after Diane filed a recusal motion, citing his close friendship with Richard Weston. Judge Hawkins was 60 years old, no nonsense, and known for her thorough research. She had never accepted a single campaign contribution from any attorney or litigant who might appear before her. She was perfect. The night before the hearing, Claire couldn't sleep. She sat in Diane's guest room, her hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move. We're going to be okay, Eleanor, she whispered. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm going to protect you, I promise. Her phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. I'm scared. Claire texted back. Me too, but we're doing this together. A long pause, then, thank you for giving me a reason to fight. At 6 a.m., Claire got dressed in the most professional maternity outfit she owned. Navy blue dress, low heels, minimal jewelry. She looked like what she was, a lawyer going into battle. Diane drove her to the courthouse. They didn't talk much on the way. There was nothing left to say. Marcus was already there when they arrived, surrounded by his team of 6 lawyers. His father sat in the gallery behind him, silver-haired and confident, radiating the kind of authority that came from decades of getting his way. Claire took her place at the plaintiff's table, alone. She had decided to represent herself for this part of the hearing. It was a risk, a huge risk, but she wanted the judge to see her, not through the filter of lawyers and legal arguments, but as she really was, a pregnant woman fighting for her daughter. Judge Hawkins entered. Everyone rose. "Be seated," the judge said. "We're here today on the matter of Weston versus Weston, specifically the respondent's motion for emergency custody. Mr. Crawford, you may proceed with your case." William Crawford, Marcus's lead attorney, stood and approached the bench. "Your Honor, the respondent's position is clear. The petitioner, Claire Weston, has demonstrated a pattern of erratic and unstable behavior that makes her unfit to serve as primary custodian of the minor child. We will present evidence of corporate espionage, psychological manipulation, and a systematic campaign of harassment against my client." He presented his case for over an hour. Witnesses testified about Claire's break-in at the office. A psychologist hired by Marcus's team offered opinions about her mental state based on secondhand information. The Page 6 article was entered into evidence. Through it all, Claire sat quietly, taking notes, waiting. When Crawford finally finished, Judge Hawkins turned to her. "Mrs. Weston, you may present your case." Claire stood. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. "Your Honor, I would like to call my first witness, Rosa Martinez." Rosa Martinez took the stand looking small and nervous, but her voice was strong. "Miss Martinez," Claire began, "how long did you work for the Weston family?" 22 years. "And in that time, did you ever witness anything that concerned you?" William Crawford shot to his feet. "Objection, vague." "I'll rephrase," Claire said smoothly. "Ms. Martinez, did you ever witness Marcus Weston engaging in inappropriate behavior with female employees?" Rosa nodded. "Yes, many times. I saw him corner women in hallways. I heard things through doors. I saw women leave his office crying." "And what happened to those women?" "They would disappear, stop coming to work. Later I would find paperwork, non-disclosure agreements, settlement payments." "How many times did you witness this pattern?" "At least 3 times that I saw directly. Maybe more that I didn't see." Claire introduced the NDAs from Rosa's files into evidence. Crawford objected repeatedly. Judge Hawkins overruled. Claire called her second witness, Jessica Crane. Marcus's mistress walked into the courtroom looking terrified. She was young and beautiful and clearly out of her depth. "Miss Crane," Claire said gently, "I know this is difficult. I'm not here to hurt you. I just need you to tell the truth." Jessica nodded, her eyes wet. "Were you aware that Marcus Weston was married when you began your relationship?" "He told me they were separated." Jessica's voice was shaky. "He said she was crazy and controlling. He said they were getting divorced anyway." "Did he ever mention other women? Other affairs?" "No, he said I was special. He said he loved me." Claire pulled out a document. "Miss Crane, I'm showing you 3 non-disclosure agreements signed by women who worked at Weston Dynamics. Were you aware that Marcus had relationships with any of these women?" Jessica looked at the documents. Her face crumbled. "No, oh my God, no, I didn't know." "He told you that you were the only one?" "Yes." Jessica was crying now. "He said after the baby was born, we would be together for real. He said..." She broke off, covering her face with her hands. "I'm such an idiot." Claire felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Jessica wasn't a villain. She was just another woman who had been lied to. "Miss Crane, I'm not here to punish you. You were deceived, just like me. I just need you to tell the truth." Jessica wiped her eyes and nodded. "He planned this, the whole thing. He told me that if his wife ever found out, he would make her look crazy. He had a plan. He called it his insurance policy." "Did he tell you what this insurance policy involved?" "He said his father had connections. Judges, lawyers, people who could make problems disappear." Jessica looked directly at Marcus for the first time. He said you would never believe her over him, because nobody ever does. The courtroom was silent. Marcus's face had gone gray. Claire turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to call my final witness, Victoria Weston. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Richard Weston shot to his feet. This is outrageous. My wife has nothing to do with— Sit down, Mr. Weston, Judge Hawkins said coldly, or I will have you removed from my courtroom. Richard sat. His face was murderous. Victoria entered through a side door. She walked slowly to the witness stand, her head held high, her hands trembling. She was sworn in. She sat down. And then she met her husband's eyes. I have been married to Richard Weston for 35 years, she began. And for 35 years, I have kept his secrets. She told the story, all of it. The harassment when she was his assistant. The NDA she signed when she was 23 and pregnant and had nowhere else to turn. The decades of watching him do the same thing to other women while she stayed silent. She talked about the judges he bribed, the favors he called in, the system he had built to protect himself and his son from any consequences. And she talked about Marcus. I tried to raise him differently, Victoria said, her voice breaking. I tried to teach him to be a good man, but Richard, he undid everything. He taught Marcus that women were objects, that rules were for other people, that enough money could make any problem disappear. She looked at her son with tears streaming down her face. I failed you, Marcus. I let you become him. That's my greatest shame. Then she looked at Claire. But I won't let you fail your daughter. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Hawkins was writing rapidly. Claire stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, I would like to submit one final piece of evidence. She handed over the USB drive. This drive contains financial records showing that Marcus Weston hid $47 million in offshore accounts, in direct violation of his fiduciary duties and his financial disclosure obligations. It also contains evidence that Richard Weston, a former judge, has been systematically bribing current members of the judiciary and interfering with legal proceedings, including this one. She paused. And it contains a recording made 2 nights ago of Richard Weston attempting to contact a member of the Judicial Ethics Board to influence the investigation into my law license. Richard Weston's face went from gray to white. This is fabricated, he sputtered. This is lies and manipulation. Mr. Weston, Judge Hawkins said, and her voice could have frozen fire. You will be silent, or you will be arrested for contempt. Do I make myself clear? Richard sat back down. He looked, for the first time in perhaps his entire life, afraid. Judge Hawkins reviewed the evidence for over an hour. The courtroom waited in tense silence. Finally, she looked up. Based on the evidence presented today, this court finds that the respondent's emergency motion for custody is not only without merit, but appears to be part of a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation against the petitioner. She turned to Marcus. Mr. Weston, the evidence suggests you have been hiding assets, suborning perjury, and working with your father to obstruct justice. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Then she turned to Richard. Mr. Weston Sr., the evidence of judicial corruption is deeply troubling. I am also referring this matter for investigation, and I am issuing an emergency order freezing all assets connected to the shell companies identified in these documents. Finally, she looked at Claire. Mrs. Weston, this court grants your petition for divorce. You are awarded sole legal and physical custody of your daughter. You are awarded 60% of all marital assets, including the previously undisclosed offshore account accounts. You are awarded the marital residence in Manhattan and the property in the Hamptons. And Mr. Marcus Weston is hereby ordered to maintain a distance of 500 feet from you and your child at all times. She banged her gavel. This court is adjourned. 6 weeks later, Claire Montgomery stood in the nursery of her new brownstone in Brooklyn. The walls were painted soft lavender. A white crib sat by the window, topped with a mobile of silver stars. A rocking chair waited in the corner beside a stack of children's books. And in Claire's arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was Eleanor Margaret Montgomery. Not Weston. Montgomery. Claire had legally changed her daughter's name the day after the custody ruling. Eleanor would grow up knowing exactly who she was, a Montgomery woman. Strong, resilient, free. She's beautiful. Margaret Montgomery stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes. She looks just like you did. I hope she has your stubbornness, Claire said. Oh, she will. It skips generations. They laughed softly, trying not to wake the sleeping baby. Diane arrived an hour later with champagne and sparkling cider and the kind of expensive cheese that Claire hadn't been able to afford a month ago. To motherhood, Diane said, raising her glass, and to the complete and total destruction of Marcus Weston. What's happening with the criminal case? Claire asked. The district attorney loves it. Marcus is facing fraud charges and will probably plead down to something with minimal jail time. White-collar crime. Diane shrugged. But the real prize is Richard. They found evidence of judicial corruption going back 20 years. He's facing multiple felony charges. His law license is already gone. And the government contract? Voided. Weston Dynamics lost the bid. Their stock dropped 40%. Diane smiled. Last I heard, Marcus is trying to sell his Hamptons house to pay his legal fees. Claire looked down at her sleeping daughter. Eleanor's tiny fingers curled around her thumb. It's strange, she said quietly. I should feel triumphant. I won. We won. But I just feel tired. That's because you're a new mother and you haven't slept in 2 weeks. Diane touched her shoulder. The triumph will come. Right now, you just need to rest. An hour later, Victoria Weston came to visit. It was strange having her former mother-in-law in her home, but something had changed between them in that courtroom. They had fought together, and that created a bond that was hard to explain. Victoria held Eleanor with the practiced ease of a grandmother. You know, she said, I never thought I would say this to the woman who destroyed my family. But thank you. I didn't destroy your family, Claire replied. I just showed everyone what was already broken. Victoria nodded slowly. Richard filed for divorce. Can you believe it? After everything, he's the one leaving me. She laughed, and there was genuine humor in it. I think he's afraid I'll testify against him at the criminal trial. As if I haven't been waiting 35 years for exactly that opportunity. What will you do now? I don't know. For the first time in my adult life, I don't know what comes next. Victoria looked up with wet eyes. It's terrifying and wonderful. She handed Eleanor back to Claire. She's beautiful. She's going to be a fighter like her mother. That's the plan. 1 year later, Claire sat in her home office, reviewing applications for the Montgomery Fund. The foundation had been her idea, born in the darkest days of her fight against Marcus. A legal fund for women escaping abusive marriages, free attorneys, emergency housing, financial support, everything she had needed and almost didn't have. They had helped over 200 women in the first year alone, 200 women who got out, 200 daughters and sons who grew up free. Eleanor was playing on the floor nearby, stacking blocks and knocking them down with delighted shrieks. She was walking now, toddling around the brownstone with fearless determination. Claire's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She opened it without thinking. I know what you did. This is not over. There was a photo attached. Claire's stomach dropped. Marcus, standing outside a building she recognized. A preschool. Eleanor's preschool. For a long moment, Claire felt the old fear wash over her. The terror of those weeks when she had nothing, when she thought she would lose everything. Then she looked at her daughter, at the life she had built, at the woman she had become, and she smiled. She opened her laptop and pulled up a file labeled Insurance. Inside was everything she had held back from the first trial, the worst of the documents, the most damaging evidence, the things she had kept in reserve just in case, because Montgomery women always have an escape plan. She picked up her phone and dialed Diane. He made contact. Time for phase 2. Epilogue. 2 years after the divorce, Claire Montgomery walked into a federal courtroom to testify against Richard Weston. The former judge sat at the defendant's table, diminished and gray. His expensive lawyers had failed to save him. The evidence was too overwhelming. Too many women had come forward. Too many judges had testified about his bribes. Claire took the stand and told her story. The whole story. From the night she found the second phone to the morning she watched him hauled away in handcuffs. When she finished, Richard Weston looked at her with pure hatred. You ruined me, he said. You destroyed everything I built. Claire met his eyes without flinching. No, Mr. Weston, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone else could see it. Richard Weston was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Marcus, who had violated his restraining order, received an additional 3 years for stalking and intimidation. Neither of them would see Eleanor grow up. Neither of them would influence the kind of woman she became. Claire walked out of the courthouse into bright spring sunshine. Her mother was waiting on the steps with Eleanor, who ran toward her with arms outstretched. "Mama!" Claire swept her daughter up and held her tight. "It's over, baby girl," she whispered. "It's finally over." But it wasn't really over, of course. It was just the beginning. The Montgomery Fund grew larger every year. More women, more survivors, more daughters who would grow up knowing their own strength. And Claire Montgomery, who had once believed she had the perfect life, discovered something better. She had a real life, messy and complicated and full of challenges. A life where she was the author of her own story. That was worth more than any penthouse, more than any billionaire husband, more than any illusion of perfection. That was freedom. And freedom, Claire had learned, was the only thing worth fighting for. And that's the story of Claire Montgomery, a woman who walked into hell and came out holding the matches. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button. It tells me you want more stories like this. Drop a comment below. Tell me, could you ever forgive a betrayal like this? I read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to fight back. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Join our family. We've got more stories that will keep you up at night. See you in the next one.